Guys, welcome back. If you have textured, acne prone, sensitive skin, any or all of the above like I do, I think you guys are going to find this video very helpful. So I can't wait to share my tricks with you. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. I would love for you to join me, and don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you do enjoy it. But let's get into the video. So I wanted to make this video because I know sometimes on social media it can be hard to compare your skin to others, especially with a lot of the filters, smoothing, all that stuff that sometimes influencers use and aren't totally transparent with. So I remember when I was younger and watching YouTube videos, I would do my makeup super glam like other YouTubers and then be like, why does my makeup look like crap? And there's like beautiful. So I wanted to make a video because it's totally normal to have textured skin and there are tips and tricks so you don't accentuate it, but also like it's not something that you'd be ashamed of or really like feel weird about if you see other people's faces that are completely flawless. Sometimes it's not always real. So I just wanted to be very transparent with you guys and share you guys the tips and tricks that I learned to help make the most flawless looking base. So let's get into the video. If you notice things are a little bit different, weird, lighting is off, bed is different because I'm moving. So all this will be changed in my next videos. I'm going to be doing some lighting and otherwise just filming setup upgrades for you guys. So I'm really excited to improve my content. This will be one of the last videos, if not the last video I film in this room. So goodbye room, I will not miss you. Anyway, since most of my stuff is packed, I was looking at the makeup that I have on hand, which is just like my essentials at this point, and I was wondering what kind of video I could film for you guys, and then it came into my head. I wanted to film a texture tips foundation video. If you have textured skin, sensitive skin, acne prone skin, acne scarred skin, if you have all of the above like me, I just wanted to share you guys all the tips that I've learned over the years of doing my own makeup. I do have very textured skin, not only acne scarring, but on this, like basically my whole cheeks and my forehead. I think I have KP on my face, which is like, I always forget how to say that, Keratosis pilaris or whatever it is. I have it on my arms too. So basically they're just like these little bumps that are pretty hard to get rid of. I will share some skincare products in the description below that I like for textured skin. I feel like that would have to be a whole different video. If you want my favorite skincare products for textured skin, definitely comment that below because I'd love to do another video like that if you guys would love to see it. But let's get into the video. First tip would be make sure that your skin is prepped well. Find something that works for your skin. For me, I have more normal to combo skin. In the winter, it is usually drier. In the summer, it's oilier. So I usually change up my skincare routine depending on how my skin is feeling. And I like to do my skincare a little bit before I do my makeup so everything sinks in. And make sure that your skincare products also work with your makeup products. I feel like certain ones I don't use during the daytime because they do tend to pill with any other product that I like put on top of. So just make sure makeup and skincare are compatible and compatible with your skin. You will already be off to a good start. I already have all my skincare on. We're going to start with primer. I'm going to use the Milk Hydro Grip Primer. I really like this one. It's a little more hydrating. Just use whatever primer works for your skin. If you do have textured skin, you might like more of a silicone based primer that's really going to smooth everything out and lay a nice base for your foundation. Especially if you have sort of pitted acne scars or anything like that, a silicone-based primer is just really going to help to smooth out all of that, and your foundation will hopefully look less textured with a smoothing primer. Before I start foundation, I just wanted to try to show you guys what I have going on texture-wise. So like this whole area of my cheek, I usually get like the worst texture right in my jawline area though. And then I have acne scarring and a couple active acne, usually always on my chin, and that's usually like the main areas of concern for me is just like this whole area. Another pimple right there, and then I do have some texture on my forehead that's getting better, thankfully to my skincare routine. But yeah, this is what I got. For my foundation, my absolute favorite lately has been the Wander Beauty Nude Illusion Liquid Foundation. Use whatever works for your skin. For me, this just sits beautifully on my texture. I recommend more of a lightweight type of foundation with a satin finish. Personally, for me, with all the foundations I've tried, I feel like they look the best on texture. Matte, very heavy foundations are just gonna cling to the texture and sort of emphasize it. This one's very lightweight, but still gives you full coverage, which is why I love it. Definitely recommend this one, and I use the shade Light Medium, which is probably a little bit dark since my tan is rubbing off, but absolutely love this. And if you have textured skin, I definitely recommend this. And for my sensitive skin, I haven't noticed any irritation so far, so pretty good. I'm just going to start with a little bit on my cheek, and another tip for you guys is start with very light layers, because once you put too much it's hard to go back, but you can always build it up. And my favorite way to apply foundation is with a sponge. For my texture, I feel like I just get the best application, and I think it works really well with this foundation. If you do use a brush, I will show you on the other side of my face my trick for applying foundation to textured skin using a brush, because the typical like buffing motion, I know for my skin it does not work, so I want to share that tip with you guys. For this side of the face, I'm using the Clove & Hollow. This is their buffer brush, and instead of doing a buffing motion, I just like to tap it in like this. It takes a little bit longer than buffing it in, but I think it really just pushes it into your skin instead of swiping it over your texture, because that's how it usually gets enhanced, is when product is just like, that was funny, when product is just swiped over it. To like my neck, I usually do some more buffing motions, but on the areas I have the most texture, I make sure I really am using a stippling motion. The rest of my face, I'm going in with my sponge, and then also I added some extra coverage areas where I needed it, so I'm using a sponge for those as well. Okay, here's how we're looking with one layer of foundation on. If you do want a full coverage base, I also recommend that you find a foundation that you like that's lightweight and full coverage instead of layering up different products, because in my experience, using the least amount of product to get the full coverage that I want always ends up looking better than having more product on my face, especially when you have textured skin. And to concealer, I have the same formula recommendation for concealer as I do with foundation. When you have textured skin, this also would go if you have melia under your eyes. Same type of thing. Go with a very lightweight formula that still gives you the coverage you want. My favorite is the Ilia True Skin Syrup Concealer, because it gives a good amount of coverage and it just looks beautiful under the eyes and doesn't add a lot of weight to the face. So what I do with this is put it under my eyes. And then if you do have some other areas where you want to spot conceal, I know this is a little bit lighter, but now would be the time to do it. That'd be a tip. Don't do what I do. Get a concealer that matches your face tone, not like your highlighting zone. Face tone, highlighting zone. Anyway, so it doesn't accentuate whatever you put it on. It's the only one I have, so I'm gonna do that today. This concealer, I do like to let it sit on my face so the water evaporates and I get more coverage out of it. Just one of my favorite things to do with this concealer. I think it looks way better when you do it. Just don't let it sit too long, maybe just like a minute or so. Usually when I am letting that set, I will go in with a cream bronzer if I'm using one that day. I'm going to use the Bare Minerals Hydrating Foundation Stick in the shade Chestnut today. It's not really a contour, it's more of this very brown shade. If you are going to use a cream bronzer contour, I think creams are really nice for textured skin if you apply them correctly. In terms of powder, I will show you guys tricks about applying powder, but they can be tricky on textured skin. But a cream, when you apply it in a stippling motion, it's just gonna guarantee that your skin will look nice and smooth and blended. I'm going to do a little bit on where my bronzer would be. This is so pigmented, so like I do the tiniest little amount. And some down my nose, a little bit of lip. We'll do a little bit on the jawline too. I'm going to blend out my concealer with my Real Technique sponge. I like using my sponge for everything. I just feel like it works the best on my skin. I've never had luck with like blending my concealer with a brush or even my fingers. I feel like your fingers can really accentuate texture with products. Even though it does warm it up and make it sort of sink into your skin more, I feel like it just picks up on product that is on the lower texture of your skin instead of like the higher texture, if that makes sense. For cream products, I usually like using my sponge as well, just in the same stippling motion. If you do want to use a brush, just use that same motion I talked about for foundation. Just stipple it in and you will get good results with it. If you do feel like you need to sort of buff a little bit more when you're using your cream on top of your foundation, it's totally fine to do so, because you could always go back in with your sponge and then press it over to make sure everything lays evenly. But I would definitely not recommend buffing any sort of powder over a liquid or cream. This bronzer stick is so pretty. It's actually a foundation. But anyway, I like that Bare Minerals stick foundation formula I used as bronzer for textured skin a lot. I don't necessarily like that as a foundation. I feel like it's just a little bit too slippery, and too slippery of a formula on textured skin I feel like just makes everything worse. That goes with like either side of the spectrum. Anything that's too slippery and anything that's too dry doesn't work. That's why I like a really satin, just lightweight, more liquid foundation. But this one is a hydrating foundation stick and it's oil free. it blends, I feel like, so well with anything. Next tip, if you do want to highlight your face in other areas besides the under eyes, I would recommend doing it before you do powder. I would recommend using a concealer instead of a powder or a cream foundation, because I find that it works a lot better with texture using a cream product as opposed to like baking with a light powder. When I do that on this parts of my cheek, I feel like it literally just highlights all of the texture on my face, and that's where like the concentration of it is. So if I do want to highlight, which I usually don't do below my cheekbones, again, just because that's like where I got a lot of texture and it draws attention to it when you put a lighter shade there. But if I do want to do it just to sharpen everything up, definitely use a concealer or a liquid product. I think it looks 10 times better. It's a closer look at how our base is looking so far. Looks really nice. I need to set my under eyes, but if you guys want some other options besides the Wander Beauty foundation, I will list my other favorite foundations and concealers for textured skin below in case you're curious and just want some different recommendations. Let's move on to powder. Man, have I had the hardest time finding a powder that works for my skin. For having textured skin, acne prone skin, acne scarring, I feel like powder is one of those things. It's so important to get right because it could go wrong really quickly. And my favorite, if you watch my channel, this is a no-brainer. You know I'm going to recommend this, but it's the Ilia Soft Focus Finishing Powder. This is the only powder I feel like works for my skin and my under eyes. If you have like mature under eyes, like fine lines, or just textured skin in general, this is amazing. It doesn't really sit on top of your face, it just makes you look airbrushed, and it's a talc-free powder. Say all the good things about this. I think it really is amazing and worth the money. I've tried so many powders and nothing has topped this. It's still just my favorite powder, and I don't even know how it looks so good, but it does, and it's really amazing. You can get away without setting your face. That's amazing. I wish I could do that. But I always do need to set at least my under eyes in my T-zone, so I love the Ilia powder for that. Under eyes, I love using this Real Techniques setting brush. Anything that's smaller and more densely packed, I would not recommend like a fluffy brush like this, because if you use this and you sort of just swipe on your under eyes when nothing is set yet, what it's going to do is pick up the wet product, mix it in with the powder, and sort of just cause a textured mess. At least for me, that never works out. I love a tiny little dense brush like this one, and then I pick up powder on both sides of the brush. You don't want this to be dry, not dry, you want this to be like fully coated with powder, because if a brush without powder touches your skin, has the possibility of picking up the liquid and again just like lifting it off and making your skin look more textured. Once I have my brush packed with powder, I go back in with my sponge under my eyes and on the sides of my nose, anywhere that starts to just crease. I'm just taking my brush, I start on the inner corner, and again using that same just tapping motion and never swiping it. Swipe or no swiping. It's the motto for textured skin right there. Once you have powder down, you can go back in and sort of do this motion a little bit if you have to brush anything off, but make sure that you do have powder down before you do that. I'm just doing the same thing for this eye. And I also wanted to comment on baking with powder. I know some people like to do that. I've done that occasionally, but it's such like a gamble. I feel like sometimes it looks good and sometimes it doesn't. Overall, it's just like a really drying type of technique that's more of like for TV, film, and just like super glam looks that you need to stay a really long time. And I also feel like baking is just texture's worst enemy. When you bake, even when you let it sit, I feel like once you brush it off in that swiping motion, again, the powder just picks up on that liquid and makes everything look more textured. I've tried to do it like on this part of my face and it was so bad. If you guys bake and you have textured skin, let me know your tricks. I know some people like it for textured skin because it makes everything look smooth, but in my experience, it just looks better when I use a thin layer of powder. Lightly set the rest of my face, a little bit of the Ilia powder, and just a big fluffy brush. This one is from ColourPop. Then, same technique, pat it on your face. Again, don't do that whole swiping thing that you might see some people do. I also wanted to mention, if you use powdered products on top of liquid, I would make sure you set before you add that powder. So even if you don't want to set your whole face but want to use bronzer, blush, and highlight, just make sure you are setting that area. So when you put your powder on top, it's going on top of powder instead of that liquid, because again, that liquid and powder formula in a swiping motion or just a motion that's not stippling usually does not end well. Okay, so bam, here's our base. I will zoom you guys in a little bit more so you can see how everything looks. Here we are. I think everything is looking good. Texture isn't being enhanced, and it still has a natural finish. I love this combination of products. It's been like my go-to base routine lately. It always looks good and never gives me any problems. So I really recommend these specific products I'm using, but again, as I mentioned, I will link more below. Alrighty, let's get into my tips for bronzer, blush, highlight, all the cheek goodness. First off, I'm going to go in with the Hourglass. This is the Nude Bronze Light shade, and the reason, that looks a little weird. The reason I recommend this one specifically, you can use a matte bronzer on your skin. If you want something that looks really natural, I love these Hourglass ones because they have a shimmer through them, but they're so finely milled. I think it's because they are baked. They just look really natural on the skin, and they don't have a lot of chunky shimmer in it, which is, again, something that's not good for texture because it just tends to enhance things. But if you want a more glowy natural bronzer, go for a formula like this. I also really like the Honest Beauty Luminizing Glow Powder. Similar formula, and then also Found Beauty has one. There's one from Well People. Go for a more baked option. I feel like they look really beautiful on the skin. What I do with this is just get some bronzer on my brush, and then I stipple it on the skin. Again, no swiping. Cardinal rule here. If I do swipe, even if I have powder set down, I feel like it just tends to pick things up and make things look more textured. So it's just a really simple and easy trick to get your base to look better. Just stipple it on, and I will share you guys my tips for creams as well. But I'm just going to bronze up the perimeter of my face. And then next, if you do want to contour, I recommend doing the same thing. I'm using the Charlotte Tilbury Bronze and Glow, Sculpt and Glow, Bronze and Glow. And then you can use a smaller brush, but just make sure you're doing that same technique of stippling. Also a really nice powder formula for textured skin. It has a little bit of a glow to it, but still a very natural and soft formula. For blush, if you do want a powder formula, I recommend the Hourglass blushes. I don't have mine on hand. I think I already packed it away, unfortunately, but I love that blush. I'm going to share with you guys some tips for cream blushes if you do prefer to use a cream. I think they look really beautiful and add a nice glow to the cheeks. I'm going to use the Tower 28 Beach Please Magic Hour, which is like my favorite cream blush at the moment. Really pretty, more dewy formula, but still has a ton of pigment and has great wear. We'll share with you guys two techniques. If you want to use a brush with your cream, what I like to do is get some of the product on my brush. Again, this is really pigmented, so I like to stipple all the product on the brush. Even if it isn't this pigmented, I still do this because you want the product to be really evenly distributed, and you don't want any patches that are darker or just have more product than other parts of the brushes. So most of the color is stippled on. I do this weird face and then stipple it onto my cheeks. Sometimes I like to use a brush with cream blush. Other times I really prefer a sponge. Either way, I think it gives a nice effect. I usually go for a sponge if I'm looking for a more sheer application. As you can see, this side is pigmented. Even if you use a brush, go back in with your sponge. And even though we have powder on and the sponge is a little bit damp, just make sure your sponge isn't too wet, because that will like pick up on your texture. Make sure it's just a little bit wet and it will press everything into the skin. Now for the sponge application, you can use a different sponge. This is the only one I have on hand right now, but I like to squeeze it so it has this more like round ovular shape. You can probably buy one that's already this shape, but I take the same stuff. You can dip directly into the blush, but make sure that it's evenly distributed like I did with the brush. Blush. I'm like forgetting which one to say. Anyway, once the product is on, same motion, stipple it onto the skin. So there we are. Blush is done. On to highlight, which is another very tricky product for textured skin. I'm going to show you guys how to use a powdered highlight today. If you're going to use a cream highlight, same technique as with everything else, just make sure you stipple it. I don't necessarily like using my fingers with a cream highlight too much. I feel like they can pick up on the powder. I like to use a sponge with a cream highlight, or even a brush, just make sure it's a very dense brush so it doesn't swipe up anything. But anyway, I'm going to use the PYT Upgrade highlight today, which is, it's a more soft highlight. I would also recommend not going for a super metallic highlight, although you can make them work. I think a softer highlight is just going to look better overall. If you want a metallic highlight, go for it, girl. But for me, I do have texture right there, so I don't want to enhance it too much. This is the perfect sort of highlight formula because it has a glow to it, but it's super finely milled, not too chunky. It goes with any like powder formula I'm recommending throughout this video. More baked style products, light on the shimmer. I really love the Honest Beauty Luminizing Powder as well. I'm sure the Hourglass highlights are similar to the bronzer as well. Anyway, I'm going to take the highlight with a fan brush. This one is from Bodyography. And I just like to get an even application on it. And then with this, I feel like my tips for all of these have been exactly the same. This is like the only product I feel like I can actually brush on, even when you have a cream there, because I feel like the fan type brush just applies it really evenly. I had to do this, but if you want to avoid enhancing texture even more, put your powder highlight before your cream blush if you are going to do a cream blush, because putting that powder and swiping it over cream, you're just more at risk to get a little more texture enhancing type of look. But I forgot to do that, so I can still make it work. I also say just don't highlight any areas you have a lot of texture unless you want to enhance that part of your face, because anything shimmery and lighter is just gonna bring it out of your face even more. So, I mean, I do have texture on my cheeks. I just use a very finely milled, light, not super metallic type of highlight. I feel like that works well. But say you have like texture on your skin, which I had to, like, I would avoid highlighting that area. My last tip for a flawless base with textured skin would be use a setting mist. I don't really have one that I particularly like. I like the Pixie Glow Mist. It's very glowy though. Tatcha Dewy Skin I like as well. I'm gonna use the Audacity Aloe Toner. You can also use a toner if you don't have a setting spray on hand. But just shake this up. And just spray it on your face, and I like to really coat my face, like make sure everything is wet, because the trick I do after this I feel like makes everything look really smooth. So once your face is very wet, let it dry about halfway, so it's not like soaking wet but you still have a little bit of the liquid left on top of your makeup. This is not a good fan. I don't know why I'm doing that. Okay, so once it's almost all dry, go back in with your sponge and then just tap over everything. What this is gonna do is melt the powder into your skin, all the powders, creams, foundations. Just gonna make everything look, it's gonna be on one plane of your face instead of, this is so hard to describe, instead of being like a layer of foundation, a layer of powder, a layer of cream. It's gonna melt everything together. And again, really make sure your face is not too wet and your sponge isn't too wet, because that could just make everything worse. This trick will really help if you feel like you overdid the powder or something just looking extra textury. Then also if you use a mattifying one or a glowy one, it's gonna give you the finish and longevity that you want. All right, so here we are. Here's our finished base look for textured, sensitive, acne-prone skin. Go ahead and wrap up the rest of my makeup and then I will be back. Alright guys, that was everything for my foundation tips and tricks for sensitive, acne-prone, textured skin. If you found this video helpful, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Let me know below if you'd be interested in my favorite skincare products for textured skin. Let me know in the comments. I just said that. Okay. Everything I used along with the rest of the makeup I did will be linked and listed in the description below, so don't forget to check there. Thank you for watching, and I will see you guys in my next video.